My sister Ashley had always been beautiful. She was the firstborn, my parents' pride and joy. No matter what grade she had been in, she was always the most beautiful girl in the school. I was several years younger than her, but I had always looked up to my sister with a kind of odd reverence. When I was a child, I had followed her everywhere, and for a long time we had been extremely close. She was the one who was always willing to play hide and seek with me, and she would dress me up in her clothes when she had sleepovers with her friends. Sometimes she would even let me stay up with them and chat about the big girl stuff, which seemed so much more interesting than my world of Barbies and tea parties. It all changed when she was around 13. She was officially a teen, at least in her eyes. She had begun to fill out into a woman's body, and I was blissfully unaware that our relationship had changed. However, she no longer let me follow her around, and her new favorite thing to call me was annoying. This had hurt me, and I had retreated to my parents to tell them of how she'd changed. They laughed and said it was normal sister stuff, and that I needed to leave her alone, as she was getting older and didn't have time to tolerate my childish attention. Needless to say, she had always been the favorite child. Not that my parents ever treated me badly. In fact, I had always considered them very good parents. But with my sister, they always had their blinders on. To them, she could do no wrong. When I realized that I did my best to avoid Ashley and give her space that she desired, it was almost like having a stranger living in the house with me. As I got older, I hoped that we would look back on the close relationship we'd once shared. Ashley kept herself busy, and my parents were always looking for things to add to her regimen. They were obsessed with keeping her well-rounded with extracurricular activities just to make her eligible for scholarships. Luckily, she was naturally smart and athletic, and she fit right into gymnastics and always had her homework done on time. Sometimes, she would even find time to tutor other students who just needed the help. Between her homework, gymnastics, and her active social life, she was always on the move. Even I was not immune. I was forced to join band and even take martial arts to pad out my high school resume. Boys suddenly became a huge part of her life. From the age of 13 to 18, she had always had a boyfriend somewhere, hanging around in the background. My parents were extremely strict, though. They were adamant that she wouldn't date anyone while she was in high school. You gotta focus on your grades, they would say, so she would learn to be cautious and become a rather talented liar. She mostly dated her friends' brothers, so when we went to their houses to visit or study, it didn't raise any suspicion to my parents. If they had known she had been having sex for years, they would have blown a fuse that would have decimated at least a city block. The only reason I had known about this was because I heard her giggling and telling her friends one day. Yes, I was eavesdropping, which I know was wrong, but I still did it. Besides, they were at my house and they shouldn't have left the bedroom door wide open. She didn't know I had overheard her, or I probably would have gotten a punch for being a snoop. A few months before she was set to graduate high school, the AP English teacher, Mrs. Bragg, had been diagnosed with cancer. There was a huge outpouring of support for her, as she was really loved. Even though she was never my teacher, I felt bad for her, as she was one of the few teachers that everyone liked, and I had never heard a single bad thing about her. With that news, and the fact that she would take a leave of absence, the school scrambled to find a substitute teacher to fill her place while she was gone. They eventually found a substitute, and he was sent to the school in another uproar for an entirely different reason. The new substitute teacher was gorgeous, as in, he had to have been a model at some point in his life. He looked like he could be sitting on a beach in LA rather than the halls of a high school. Over 6 feet tall, with brown hair, clear blue eyes, and a perfect physique. It was not long before he had a legion of female admirers. Before the end of the day, a girl at the school had walked by the classroom, trying to catch a glimpse of the new guy. Even the female teachers were making their attention obvious. His name was Mr. Adam Ray, and he quickly became the most popular teacher in the entire school. He even seemed to be really good at his job, and I didn't hear anything bad about him at all. My sister quickly became his favorite pupil, for all the wrong reasons. I'd only seen him a few times around the school. Since he was teaching the seniors, there was never a reason to interact with him before. There was something about him that always set me on edge. It was the way he would interact with the students, especially the female ones. The intensity in his eyes was unnerving, like a dog eyeing a piece of meat. But since everyone else seemed to adore him, I just thought I was crazy. And I was secretly glad that I wouldn't have any classes with him. I actually started staying late after school, not soon after Mr. Ray started teaching. At first she said it was staying late because she wanted to get extra help from her teachers. Later, she said she was staying late to help tutor other students who were struggling in English. My parents nodded their approval and reminded her to put it on her college applications that she was doing volunteer work. She smiled at my parents and assured them that she would. Months passed, and my sister got accepted with a complete scholarship to her dream college in North Carolina. We were all ecstatic for her, and she had worked so hard, and I remember both my mom and I just crying with happiness. It was a month to graduation, and my parents were already planning to throw a huge graduation party. They were going to invite everyone that they can think of, and started sending out invitations. Now, my parents are actually very wealthy, so they treated this like it was a wedding, and they were spending enough that it might as well have been. My sister had been getting more and more secretive, though. The entire time, her grades never slipped, so it never registered with my parents. In fact, her English grades were fantastic, and she'd been getting straight A's for months. And since we shared a wall between our bedrooms, I could hear her late at night talking on her phone, giggling and even sometimes moaning, which I didn't even want to think too much about. I had my suspicions. Her friends came over less and less, and she started spending more time away from home. I assumed it was a new boy that had caught her attention, but I had no idea who it was. She would frequently miss dinner and tell us that she had picked something up on the way home. My parents started insisting that she should come home for dinner on time every night, and it was the first time I'd ever seen them get remotely stern with her. She huffed and fumed and started coming home every night on time, but as soon as dinner was over, she went into her room to study. But I could still hear the faint sounds of her talking on the phone with someone. The day of the school graduation had arrived, and my parents were prepared and beaming for the event. My sister looked beautiful in her white dress that she wore under her robe, and my mom had taken her to the hair salon just to get her hair done for the ceremony. Even I dressed up, as I wanted to look nice for my sister on her big day. She was getting ready to become an adult and go to her dream college. She was even nice to me that day, which I relished. I was hoping that while she was away at college, I can come visit her, and maybe we could become close again, just like we had been as children. At the school, we struggled to find a place to park and shuffled awkwardly to find a place on the bleachers, as every parent and extended family member seemed to come to these things. When Ashley's name was called, there was a huge cheer as she went to go and accept her diploma. She stopped and waved, and my mom cried as she took her picture with her camera. After her walk across the stage, she stepped into the hallway to join her friends and the other students. My mom wanted to go and wait for my sister in the hallway, but we were boxed in and couldn't get out easily. So we waited until the ceremony was over, and everyone finally started filing out of the auditorium. About 30 minutes had passed since we've seen Ashley walk off the stage, and my parents were smiling ear to ear. But we couldn't find her anywhere. My dad even looked outside to see if she'd given up on us and was waiting by the car. She wasn't there. My mom called her cell phone, but all she got was a voicemail. By this time, we'd been looking for her for another 30 minutes, and the hallway was mostly empty now. I spotted one of my sister's friends leaving, and I ran over to her, asking her if she'd seen my sister. My sister's friend got this weird sort of smile on her face and laughed, telling me that she was sure my sister had already left with someone. I started getting worried, as I knew that even she would have at least called us to let us know that she had caught a ride with someone else. I ran back and told my parents, and they were just even more upset, but they assumed she caught a ride with a friend. Perhaps she had been just too excited about graduation to call them. Still, I knew she'd be in trouble for leaving like that. We all just assumed that she'd be back at the house, since that's where the graduation party was going to be, so maybe she had wanted to get an early start. We got back home in record time, but we didn't see any of her friends' cars there, which was weird since they were all invited. The road was lined with lots of our friends' and relatives' cars. I even saw perhaps a dozen family members milling around the backyard. Once we parked, my mom went into the house, and my dad walked towards the backyard. I could tell by the way that he moved he was really angry. I was certain that he would even ground my sister from her own party at this point. I stayed outside talking to my aunt and explaining the situation when my mom came running back out of the house. She had a note in her hand, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom was hysterical and couldn't speak, so I gently took the note from her and I read it to myself. Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I know you wouldn't understand this, but I'm in love. Mr. Ray and I had been in love for several months, and he asked me to marry him, so I said yes. We are moving to North Carolina so I can attend college with my scholarship. Mr. Ray already has a new job for the next school year and has promised to support me, so I will not ask you for money. I knew you would try to stop us, so I left in secret. Please don't be mad. I'll call you when I get to North Carolina. Keep in mind, I'm 18 and a legal adult, so I can make my own decisions. I love you guys. P.S. You're really going to love Mr. Ray. He's the greatest guy in the world. And under that note, there was another message, written in a fine, cursive hand, and it read, Don't worry, I'll take very good care of her. It was not my sister's handwriting, so I assumed that it was Mr. Ray. After reading this, I handed it over to my dad, who scanned the note and became completely red in the face. He pulled out his phone and started calling the police. My aunts consoled my mom, and I ran upstairs to my sister's room. It was pristine, but I noticed that some things were missing from their usual spot. A framed photo of our grandmother was gone, along with a stuffed pink bunny that she'd had for years. I looked in the closet, and her favorite clothes were missing. Not all of them, but enough to show that a lot had been packed into a suitcase. She was really gone. The next few hours were a blur. The cops could do nothing as she was 18 and not really a missing person until the 24 hours had passed. My parents and I called up all her friends, but they seemed to be deliberately unhelpful, and I suspected that they knew more than what they were telling us. The food sat untouched until my parents insisted that people eat some so it wouldn't go to waste. We even cut the cake that read, "Congratulations, Ashley." People ate and talked. No one had wanted to leave as they waited to see if there was any news about my sister. Her graduation presents sat unopened on the counter until I moved them into the closet. They were just too depressing to look at. It was on the 7th day that we finally got some news. Her suitcase had been found on the side of the road 20 miles from home. It had been identified because her wallet and purse had been stuffed inside. The news had sent my mother into another fit of hysterics, and she fainted. We also finally got one of her friends to talk to us when she came to our house in tears, saying that she had gotten a call from Ashley. A phone number that she didn't recognize had called her, but she ignored it thinking it was just the wrong number. When she saw they had left a voicemail, she listened to it. It was a 20-second long message where my sister's voice could clearly be heard screaming for help. A man's voice could be heard in the background, and the call went silent. My friend's sister was certain that it had been Mr. Ray's voice. After that, her friends were a little more helpful with their information. They told us that my sister and Mr. Ray had been having an affair from almost the very first day. They thought it was romantic and helped her hide the relationship from everyone. And it had been planned for months in advance that they would run away together. My father and mother did all that they could just to find my sister. A private investigator was hired, and it finally came out that Adam Ray was not who he said he was. He had used a fake name, and all of his information was false. To give some context, this happened in the late 1990s, when smartphones were still years away and we used dial-up internet. Looking someone up on the internet was not as simple as it is today. Nowadays, a quick Google search would have revealed that this guy had been a liar. His real name was Adam Raymond, but what made our blood run cold was that he had been in trouble with the law before. In fact, he had served some time in jail for beating up a former girlfriend. Months went by and we had no idea what had happened to my sister. They never turned up in North Carolina. They didn't turn up anywhere. Adam Raymond had vanished from this earth and he had taken Ashley with him. The investigation stalled for both the cops and the private investigator. When that happened, they hired other private investigators, but they also turned up with nothing. My parents sued the school corporation for not running an adequate background check and letting a criminal into the school system. They settled out of court for a substantial amount of money. Years passed. All of my sister's friends went to college and graduated. I graduated high school as well, even though it was a more subdued affair. They even had a graduation party for me, but I could see it in their eyes that they were thinking of my sister the whole time. I still went to college, though I went to a nearby college, so I could live at home. My parents wouldn't say it, but I knew they were relieved that I was close enough to them to keep an eye on me. I eventually graduated college, and I was getting ready to move out of my parents' house to attend graduate school. It was a happy and nervous time, as this would be my first time living on my own. My parents even seemed proud of me. I was sorting the mail one day, in the few days just before my college graduation. There were a lot of cards for me, people sending congratulations through the postal service. But there was one card that stood out from the rest. It was a postcard, and it looked dirty and tattered, like it had sat on the ground before being put into the mailbox. I didn't think anything of it, but I flipped it over, and I saw what was on the other side. There was a Polaroid of a grimy and disheveled woman, wearing an oversized white t-shirt that looked just as dirty as the postcard. I could easily make out her ribs and see the leanness of her legs. She reminded me of a Holocaust survivor, and she wasn't wearing anything else. At that moment, I froze. As I looked at the woman's face, I recognized her. It was Ashley. Looking far older than a woman in her 20s should have ever looked. Her gaze was vacant and empty, like a beaten dog. She didn't even seem aware that someone had taken her picture. And beneath it was a short sentence. I'm taking really good care of her.